My name is Arthur Finch, and for the past 2 decades, my life has been a relentless pursuit of turning zeros into heroes. Figuratively speaking, of course, specifically in the business world, giving new life to companies teetering on the brink of collapse. I am 45 years old, residing in the vibrant and ever-evolving city of Austin, Texas, a place that, much like my professional life, constantly reinvents itself. There's a certain thrill in taking something broken, something everyone else has given up on, and methodically, painstakingly, rebuilding it, piece by piece, until it not only functions but thrives beyond anyone's wildest expectations. It's not just about the numbers for me. It's about the people, the innovation, the puzzle of it all, finding the inefficiencies, stripping away the dead weight, and injecting new energy, new technology, new vision. I pride myself on my meticulous nature, my ability to see through the fog of failure to the clear path forward, and my unwavering commitment to the companies I dedicate myself to. My distinct quality, I suppose, is my relentless optimism paired with an absolute realism. I know what's possible, and I push everyone, including myself, to get there. A little over 10 years ago, I found myself embarking on one of my most challenging, yet ultimately rewarding, assignments. It was a manufacturing company, specializing in incredibly custom, small-batch parts that demanded the highest levels of precision. When I first walked through its doors, the silence was deafening, the air thick with the smell of old oil and unspoken despair. This once bustling hub of engineering had been reduced to a skeleton crew of only 3 employees, down from a thriving 50, a desperate attempt by the parent organization to salvage something, anything, from the wreckage. The machinery, though still capable, looked neglected, almost mournful, gathering dust in the cavernous, underutilized facility. The mood of those 3 remaining individuals, dedicated but visibly exhausted, reflected the company's dire straits, a quiet resignation that echoed through the empty workshops. It was a truly depressing sight, a monument to corporate failure, but for me, it was an irresistible challenge, a giant, intricate problem waiting to be solved. My heart, despite the overwhelming scene, fluttered with a familiar excitement, a surge of adrenaline that always accompanied the beginning of a new mission. This was my element, the kind of complex, high-stakes situation where I felt most alive, most useful. I plunged headfirst into the restructuring. My initial days were spent observing, listening, absorbing every detail of their past failures and their current, limited operations. I walked every inch of the factory floor, examined every piece of machinery, analyzed every process, no matter how insignificant it seemed. The first critical step was to identify and ruthlessly eliminate unnecessary steps in their production line, processes that had once made sense, but were now just drains on resources and efficiency. We moved quickly, cutting red tape, streamlining workflows, and implementing new, leaner manufacturing principles. Then came the investment in technology, which was absolutely crucial for a company dealing with such high-precision parts. We brought in advanced computer-controlled machines, sophisticated design software, and automated quality control systems, modernizing a facility that had fallen woefully behind the times. This wasn't just about buying new tools. It was about integrating them seamlessly, training the existing team, and fostering a culture of continuous improvement and innovation. I worked tirelessly, often putting in 14-hour days, driven by the vision of what this company could become again. As we slowly, steadily, began to breathe life back into the operation, we started the process of strategic hiring, bringing in new talent to complement the dedicated core team. We needed skilled engineers, meticulous technicians, and visionary designers, people who shared my passion for precision and progress. It was during this phase, about 6 months into my tenure, that a man named Bob joined our team. Bob was hired for his specific technical skills in a certain aspect of our manufacturing process, and initially, he seemed like a decent fit. He was competent enough in his specialized area, and his work was acceptable, though never truly outstanding. He was pleasant, agreeable even, and he always seemed to be present, but there was a distinct lack of initiative, a noticeable absence of the proactive problem-solving spirit that I was trying to cultivate in our newly invigorated team. He performed his duties, but he rarely exceeded expectations, and he certainly didn't contribute to the larger strategic thinking or the innovative leaps that were transforming the company. Over the course of the next 2 years, under my direct leadership, the company underwent a complete and utter metamorphosis. We didn't just survive, we thrived. Our revenue soared to $10 million annually, and we set an aggressive but achievable goal of $100,000 of profit per employee, a metric that spoke volumes about our newfound efficiency and strategic brilliance. We were back on the map, not just as a niche manufacturer, but as an industry leader, known for our precision, our speed, and our unwavering commitment to quality. It was a remarkable turnaround, a testament to the hard work of the entire team, and a source of immense pride for me. As the company scaled and our goals became more ambitious, the need for every single employee to contribute at a high level became paramount. It became clear that while Bob was adequate in his specialized role, he simply wasn't scaling with the company's new demands. His skills, while useful, were not evolving, and his overall output was consistently below the elevated standards we had established. He was a good worker for a static environment, but not for the dynamic, high-growth trajectory we were on. So, being a fair but firm leader, I called Bob into my office one afternoon. I started by acknowledging his specific contributions, reiterating that he was good at what he did, within his narrow skill set. But then, I transitioned to the difficult part. I explained to him, clearly and directly, that the company had moved to a new level, that our performance expectations had significantly increased, and that unfortunately, his overall contributions were not meeting those new benchmarks. I told him that while I valued his specific skills, we needed someone who could contribute more broadly, more proactively, to our rapidly expanding operations. I gave him a 2-month notice period, providing him with ample time to find a new position. I promised him that I would provide a positive reference for the areas where he truly excelled, but I also made it clear that I would not embellish or misrepresent his overall performance, nor would I lie about the areas where he fell short. I emphasized that he needed to maintain his current level of output in his specialized tasks during this transition period, or we would have to part ways immediately, but that I would be flexible and understanding when it came to his need for interviews and job searching. To Bob's credit, and perhaps because the bar was not incredibly high to begin with, there was no noticeable decrease in his effort during those 2 months. He quietly, without much fanfare, found a new job. He didn't use me as a reference, which I thought was a rather telling detail, but I didn't dwell on it. I simply wished him well, genuinely believing that he had found a good fit somewhere else, a place where his particular skill set would be appreciated without the demanding pace of our rapidly expanding enterprise. I thought that was the end of our professional association, a clean break, and I moved on, fully immersed in the continued growth and success of the company I had helped resurrect. Years passed, and the company continued to flourish under the excellent general manager I had hired to take my place. My work there was done, and I had moved on to new ventures, new challenges, new companies to pull from the brink. My reputation as a turnaround specialist continued to grow, fueled by the tangible success stories I left in my wake. Then came the unexpected twist. I flew out to visit one of our key partner companies, a long-standing collaborator that had been crucial to our supply chain and distribution networks. This was a standard business trip, routine and largely uneventful, or so I thought. As I stepped into their lobby, expecting to be greeted by my main contact, a man named Charlie, I was met by a familiar face I hadn't seen in years. It was Bob. He was standing right next to Charlie, a wide, somewhat unsettling grin plastered on his face. I was mildly surprised, happy enough to see an old acquaintance, and we exchanged pleasantries, a quick handshake, a brief catching up on our respective careers. It was all very cordial, very professional, and I genuinely felt a sense of benign goodwill. Then Charlie, my main contact at the partner company, began to speak, and what he said next hit me like a physical blow. A sudden, sharp shock that instantly evaporated my good humor and replaced it with a burning, white-hot anger. Charlie launched into an effusive monologue about how incredibly fortunate my old company had been to have Bob, specifically praising him for all the transformative things he had supposedly done, for truly getting the company out of that terrible mess. My blood ran cold as I listened, stunned, as Charlie attributed every single strategic decision, every innovative technological investment, every single operational overhaul, every single achievement that was unequivocally mine, directly to Bob. He spoke of Bob's visionary leadership, his ability to cut through the clutter, his keen insight into manufacturing processes, all of which were, to put it mildly, diametrically opposed to Bob's actual contributions, or rather, his distinct lack thereof. He rattled off my achievements as if they were Bob's, detailing the very initiatives I had personally championed and implemented, the ones Bob had merely been a peripheral, often struggling, participant in. The audacity of it, the sheer, unmitigated gall, left me speechless. To add insult to injury, Charlie, almost as an afterthought, casually waved a hand in my direction and added a small, dismissive well. A guy like Arthur helped, of course. Just helped. Me, the man who had resurrected the entire company from 3 struggling employees to a $10 million powerhouse, was reduced to a mere helper, an insignificant footnote in Bob's fabricated narrative. The rage that surged through me was immediate and intense, a primal, visceral fury that threatened to spill over. My jaw tightened, my hands clenched imperceptibly at my sides, and for a split second I contemplated saying anything to challenge the blatant lie, to expose the truth. But years of professional discipline kicked in. I forced a polite, almost frozen smile onto my face and managed to utter a calm, controlled, "Well, I'm glad Bob found a good fit here." The words felt hollow, like ash in my mouth. Inside, a furious storm raged. I was shocked beyond belief, deeply, profoundly angry. This wasn't just about credit. This was about the fundamental theft of my professional identity, the blatant appropriation of my hard-won achievements, the very essence of my expertise. It was a profound injustice, a deliberate rewriting of history, and it left a bitter taste in my mouth, tainting the memory of one of my proudest professional triumphs. Bob, my former employee, had not just moved on. He had stolen my narrative, my success, and was now basking in its reflected glory. He had become my nemesis, embodying a betrayal that went beyond mere professional slight. It felt personal, a violation of trust and integrity. The problem was no longer just about a failing company. It was about the profound injustice of seeing my life's work claimed by someone else, and the gnawing frustration of being unable, in that moment, to set the record straight. Years passed, stretching into almost a decade since that infuriating encounter at the partner company's office. The memory of Bob's audacious claims and Charlie's unwitting complicity in perpetuating the lie never truly faded. It festered beneath the surface of my professional calm, a persistent, irritating splinter in my mind. I continued my work, moving from one challenging turnaround project to the next, building new successes, new legacies, but that specific injustice remained, a dull ache that flared occasionally into sharp frustration. Every now and then, I would bump into Bob at various industry events or conferences. These encounters were always performative, a superficial dance of cordiality. Bob would greet me with that same unsettlingly confident smile, perhaps even offer a comment that subtly implied his continued connection to, and supposed influence over, the success of the company I had saved. He never explicitly repeated the grand lies from that initial meeting, but the implication was always there, a subtle nod to his supposed transformative role. Each time, I would respond with practiced politeness, a detached professionalism that masked the churning resentment inside. I found myself observing him, noticing how he carried himself, how he spoke, wondering if he even believed his own narrative anymore. It was clear that he had built a significant part of his career identity around this fabricated history, leveraging my achievements as his own. My mind often drifted to ways I could expose him, to set the record straight. I considered casually mentioning the truth to mutual acquaintances, subtly correcting the narrative in conversations, but the risk seemed too high. Directly confronting Bob or actively campaigning against his story felt petty, unprofessional, and beneath me. As a turnaround specialist, my reputation was built on results, on integrity, on my ability to fix things, not on engaging in public squabbles over credit. Any overt attempt to discredit Bob would inevitably reflect poorly on me, making me seem bitter or vindictive, and that was a professional cost I wasn't willing to pay. My reputation was my most valuable asset, meticulously built over decades of hard work and proven success, and I wouldn't risk tarnishing it for a public feud. So I tried to ignore it, to focus on my current projects, on the tangible successes I was creating right now. But it was like trying to ignore a persistent itch. It was always there, a low hum of injustice that sometimes escalated into a roaring frustration, leaving me feeling powerless, a rare and unsettling sensation for someone who always found a way to solve problems. The original company I had saved continued to do well, thanks to the robust systems I had put in place and the capable general manager, David, whom I had personally hired and mentored. David and I remained good friends, regularly checking in, discussing industry trends, and sharing insights. The manufacturing sector, like many others, faced significant turbulence in the years that followed, particularly with the global economic shifts and the unprecedented disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Supply chains were fractured, demand patterns became erratic, and many companies struggled immensely, some collapsing entirely. My former company, thanks to its strong foundation and David's steady leadership, weathered these storms remarkably well, a testament to the resilience we had built into its very fabric. During these challenging times, I occasionally heard snippets of news about Bob through the industry grapevine. To my surprise, he managed to hold onto his job at the partner company far longer than I would have predicted, given his rather limited capabilities. It seemed that the initial, effusive endorsement from Charlie, combined with Bob's practiced performance of competence, had given him a certain staying power. This only deepened my frustration. Bob was not just getting away with his lie. He was, in a way, thriving on it, continuing to leverage the stolen narrative to maintain a position he hadn't truly earned. It gnawed at me, this ongoing injustice, but there was still no direct, professional avenue for me to address it without appearing to engage in petty vindictiveness. The problem wasn't just that he had taken credit. It was that he was building a career, a false edifice, on my foundations, and there seemed to be no way to crack that veneer. The helplessness grew, a quiet despair seeping in, as I wrestled with the apparent futility of fighting a lie that had become so deeply embedded. How do you correct a narrative that everyone already accepts as truth, especially when you're no longer directly involved with the company? It was a unique and infuriating kind of problem, one that defied my usual problem-solving strategies, making the injustice feel all the more personal and unresolvable. Then came the news that, surprisingly, Bob had finally lost his job at the partner company. I wasn't entirely shocked. His mediocrity was bound to catch up with him eventually, especially in a tightening market. I simply noted it, a fleeting thought, and moved on. The world was full of people losing jobs in the post-pandemic reshuffle. I assumed this was the natural consequence of his performance finally failing to meet even a modest expectation. I thought this might be the quiet, undramatic end of Bob's professional narrative, a fitting if belated dose of reality. But I was wrong, so utterly wrong. The universe, it seemed, had a much more dramatic and directly personal form of karma in store. Just a few weeks later, my phone rang. It was David, the general manager of the company I had transformed and then left in his capable hands. His voice sounded a little different, a touch of curiosity mixed with an unusual hesitation. He began by saying, "Arthur, I have a somewhat unusual question for you, something that's come up recently, and I thought you might be able to shed some light on it." My mind immediately went to general industry gossip, perhaps a new competitor, or a potential acquisition. I was unprepared for what came next. David then explained that a highly prestigious senior leadership role had opened up within the company, a position that required significant strategic vision and proven leadership in manufacturing transformation. He said they had received many impressive applications, but one, in particular, had caught his eye, and the eyes of the hiring committee. That applicant, he revealed, was Bob. My breath caught in my throat. Bob, applying for a high-level position at the very company I had rescued, a company where he had been managed out for underperformance. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. David continued, explaining that Bob's resume was incredibly impressive, filled with claims of transformative leadership and strategic initiatives at his previous company, which David knew was the company I had built. David recounted how Bob's application detailed his supposed leadership in cutting unnecessary steps, investing in technology, and restructuring operations. All the very things I had done, all the specific initiatives that had defined my 2-year tenure there. David and Bob had not overlapped in their time at the company, so David had no direct knowledge of Bob's true role. He was, by his own admission, incredibly impressed by Bob's claims and was seriously considering offering him the job. He was calling me as a reference, as a former colleague who had worked with Bob, specifically to confirm these impressive claims. He says he was instrumental in pulling the company out of its deep financial hole, David said, his voice reflecting genuine admiration. He claims he led the charge on all those big changes you implemented. Is that true, Arthur? Was Bob really the one who got us out of that mess? The question hung in the air, a crucible of truth and lies. This was it. The moment I had unknowingly been waiting for, the culmination of a decade of simmering injustice. It was a profound moral dilemma, heavy with implications. On one hand, I could simply provide a vague, neutral reference, perhaps omitting the most damning details, allowing Bob to potentially secure a career-defining role, a role that he was utterly unqualified for, and for which he was using my achievements as his credential. That would be the easy way, the non-confrontational path. But if I did that, I would be complicit in the perpetuation of his lie, and worse, I would be allowing him to potentially undermine the very company I had poured my heart and soul into, a company now run by a friend I deeply respected. His incompetence, if he were hired for such a critical role, could genuinely harm the business. On the other hand, telling the unvarnished truth, exposing the decade-long deception, would undeniably jeopardize Bob's future. It would be a direct confrontation with the lie, a moment of reckoning. The stakes were incredibly high, not just for Bob's career, but for my own integrity, for the legacy of my work at that company, and for the future of a business I genuinely cared about. This was my absolute lowest point, facing the full, terrifying weight of the problem I had tried to ignore for so long. The lie had come home, not just to haunt me, but to threaten everything I valued, forcing my hand in a way I could no longer avoid. The weight of the decision was crushing, a silent battle within myself, knowing that my words could either solidify a decade of deceit or finally bring about a long-overdue reckoning. The phone felt heavy in my hand, the silence stretching between Austin and wherever David was, a silence filled with the echoes of a decade of festering injustice. My mind raced, reviewing every single moment of my time at that company, every decision I made, every struggle I overcame, every person I hired, including Bob. The question David had posed, so simple and direct, demanded an equally direct and truthful answer. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, consciously calming my racing heart. This wasn't about vengeance, I told myself, not purely. It was about integrity, about truth, about safeguarding the future of a company I had poured my life into, and about my own professional honesty. To stay silent, to equivocate, would be to betray not just David, but myself and the very principles I stood for. The time for subtle hints and professional politeness was over. This was the moment for unvarnished truth. "David," I began, my voice steady, betraying none of the internal turmoil. "I appreciate you calling me and trusting me with this. It's an important decision for the company, and I'll give you the full picture objectively as I remember it." I started by setting the scene, painting a clear, concise picture of the company's state before I arrived. When I came in, I explained, the company was down to 3 employees, 3. It was functionally bankrupt, struggling, and on the verge of shutting its doors permanently. The machinery was old, the processes were inefficient, and morale was non-existent. It was a complete overhaul, a full resuscitation from the ground up. I then meticulously detailed the transformation. My first major initiative was a complete top-to-bottom restructuring of operations. We cut out layers of unnecessary steps in the manufacturing process, stripping it down to its leanest, most efficient core. This involved re-engineering workflows, implementing new quality control measures, and fundamentally changing how decisions were made on the factory floor. I continued, explaining the technological investments. We then invested heavily in new technology, state-of-the-art computer numerical control machines, sophisticated design software, and automation systems that were critical for maintaining the precision we were known for. This wasn't just about buying new machines. It was about integrating them, training the existing staff, and developing entirely new manufacturing capabilities that allowed us to scale rapidly. I then addressed Bob's role directly, calmly, and factually, without an ounce of personal animosity in my tone, focusing only on the verifiable facts. "Bob," I said, "was hired about 6 months into my tenure. He had some specific skills in a very niche area of our older manufacturing process, and he performed adequately within that narrow scope. He was part of the team, yes, but his role was never strategic. He was never involved in the major restructuring decisions, nor did he lead any of the technological integrations. His claims of transforming the company, of leading the turnaround, are simply not accurate. He was a participant, yes, but not a driver. In fact, after about 1.5 years, as the company grew and our demands for proactive, high-level contributions increased, Bob's performance began to fall short of our new expectations. He simply couldn't keep pace with the elevated standards and the rapid growth. That's why, after a thorough performance review, I gave him 2 months' notice and managed him out of the company. I was fair. I offered a reference for the specific skills he did possess, but his overall contribution was not at the level required for a growing, successful enterprise. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. "David, when I visited our partner company years ago, I was shocked to hear their main contact attribute all of my strategic initiatives and accomplishments directly to Bob. I said nothing at the time because it felt unprofessional to engage in a public dispute over credit. But the truth is, every single claim Bob is making about leading that turnaround, about implementing those transformative changes, is a direct appropriation of my work. He was never in a position to do any of those things. I was the architect of that turnaround, supported by a dedicated core team, not by Bob in any leadership capacity." I concluded, "I'm telling you this not out of malice, but because you asked for the truth. You need to know who truly accomplished what, especially for a role as critical as the one you're looking to fill. I value our friendship and the integrity of that company more than anything. It's up to you what you do with this information, but I felt it was my responsibility to provide you with the accurate context. I had laid out the facts, dispassionately, but with undeniable clarity. I had risked everything, and now the outcome was entirely in David's hands. I trusted his judgment, and I hoped that the truth, finally spoken aloud after so many years, would prevail." There was a long silence on David's end after I finished speaking, a silence that felt heavy with the weight of revelation. I waited, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. Then David's voice came back, thoughtful, perhaps a little shaken. "Arthur," he said, his tone one of deep gratitude, "thank you. Truly, thank you for your honesty. I had a feeling something wasn't quite right, that his story felt a little too perfect. It just didn't quite align with the stories I'd heard about the company's near collapse and the monumental effort it took to bring it back. Your account, the details you've provided, they've given me crucial context, the missing pieces of the puzzle. It makes perfect sense now. He continued, "Consider this resolved. Bob will not be getting this job. Your candor has saved us from a potentially disastrous hiring decision. We rely on integrity here, and based on what you've told me, that's clearly not something Bob possesses in the professional sphere." A wave of profound relief washed over me, a feeling of deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with vengeance and everything to do with justice finally being served. It wasn't about actively destroying Bob's career. It was about the truth, long suppressed, finally seeing the light of day when it mattered most. I felt a sense of closure, a decade-long burden lifted from my shoulders. The injustice that had festered within me for so long had finally been addressed, not through petty revenge, but through the simple act of telling the truth. I continued my successful career, unburdened by the weight of that unaddressed wrong. I occasionally heard through the grapevine that Bob was struggling to find consistent work, unable to replicate the success he had falsely claimed, his professional journey seemingly stalled. The lie, which had propelled him forward for a decade, had finally become the very thing that stopped him cold, a poetic consequence indeed. Months later, I found myself in San Francisco, speaking at a major industry conference, sharing insights from my latest successful turnaround. The room was packed with industry leaders, investors, and fellow professionals, all eager to hear about innovative strategies for navigating complex business challenges. During the question and answer session, a hand went up in the audience. An older gentleman, someone I vaguely recognized from years past, posed a question about that remarkable turnaround I had led at the manufacturing company, specifically asking about some detailed process improvements that were, unmistakably, part of the narrative Bob had stolen and perpetuated. Before I could even formulate a diplomatic response, a familiar figure stood up from his seat near the front of the audience. It was David, my friend and the current general manager of that very company, who had traveled to the conference to attend my session. He caught my eye, a subtle nod of understanding passing between us. David then addressed the question directly, speaking with a clear, resonant voice that carried across the auditorium. "If I may interject," he began, "I think it's important to clarify something regarding that particular turnaround. While there has been some misinformation circulating in the industry for years, I can confirm, unequivocally, that Arthur Finch was the true architect of that company's resurrection." He then proceeded to publicly, professionally, and with an undeniable air of authority, detail my specific contributions. The initial state of the company, the strategic vision I had implemented, the bold technological investments, and the rigorous operational overhauls. He spoke about my leadership, my integrity, and the lasting legacy I had built. He didn't mention Bob by name, but he carefully alluded to the misinformation and the false claims that had previously distorted the narrative. He praised my vision and leadership, ensuring that every person in that room understood the true authorship of that success story. The audience murmured, a wave of recognition rippling through the room, and I saw a few familiar faces from the past, individuals who had heard Bob's version, nodding slowly in understanding, the pieces finally clicking into place for them. I felt a surge of unexpected warmth, a profound vindication that went beyond anything I could have orchestrated myself. I later learned that David, quietly and strategically, had begun to correct the narrative in wider industry circles, gently but firmly dismantling Bob's false reputation wherever it had taken root, all without me ever having to lift another finger. It was a continuous, subtle validation of my integrity, ensuring that the truth, however slow it had been in arriving, would continue to echo, clearing my name and solidifying my legacy in the most authentic way possible. The world had, in its own deliberate way, righted a long-standing wrong, and I was finally, truly unburdened.